Welcome everyone and thank you very much for joining our today's session. I will request Sean Sheikh to moderate today's session, please.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everybody to the fourth session of the Mawrid Youth Discussion Group led by Dr. Shehzad Saleem on issues related to youth. Dr. Shehzad Saleem, for those of you who don't know, is a very renowned Mawrid scholar who has worked and studied directly under Amin and Islahi and Javed Ahmed Ghamidi, who are leading scholars of the Mawrid methodology. And basically, Dr. Shehzad Saleem will be continuing in this series to share views from Mawrid's methodology, which takes a critical approach to reevaluate the sacred sources of the Quran and Sunnah. And we'll be delighted to share those views today. Dr. Shehzad will present Mawrid's reasoning behind those views. And if the reasoning is something that you find convincing, we encourage you to take a look at the views more seriously. And if it's not, then obviously that's up to your choice, which is the culture and methodology that Mawrid promotes. Dr. Shehzad, please go ahead.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear friends, participants, young minds, to this session of our Islam for Youth series. As you would all be knowing, this is our fourth session, and we have been discussing some of the very core issues which are generally discussed and debated upon, especially amongst youngsters and young minds, because these are issues in which we have diverse opinions. And at times, it's not that we are fully satisfied with the opinion which are being proffered as a result. One thing that we need to understand is that as far as the Quran and the Sunnah are concerned, which are the two original sources, of course, they are inimitable, they are forever. But as far as interpreting them is concerned, it all depends on the human mind and the way these sources are interpreted. Of course, there could be a difference of opinion in this interpretation. And so therefore, when we talked about you regarding these youth issues, many of them relate to what the Quran and the Sunnah say, or they are interpretations of the past scholars. And because of the fact that these are interpretations, they are human interpretations, and of course, they need to be reevaluated and revisited. It's not that they're always wrong, but there are chances that they need to be improved upon. And this is much like the methodology of science, in which a theory is presented and then it is either refuted or it stands the test of time, and it goes on until the time a new theory comes and replaces it. So Islamic thought or Muslim thought or thought which is based on an interpretation of these sources is something very similar. You derive your views from an original source, and those views are based on your methodology, and they have a reasoning behind it. And anyone who has the proper competence, of course, can come along and challenge your interpretation. And this challenge should be taken in a very positive way, because this is how things move along. This is how they have moved along in science and other disciplines. So in religion also, we need to understand that the methodology is precisely the same. You have to interpret whatever has been given to us. Just as the universe is the work of God and we need to interpret it, the Quran is the word of God and we need to interpret it. So when we interpret something and bring up a different theory or a different interpretation, it is not tantamount to negating the source itself as is generally understood. It only means that we are trying to revisit this understanding and re-understand what has been understood before. So we start off today with some of the topics that I'm going to introduce to you first. And these topics, as you might have seen the introduction, they are all very sensitive topics, and we'll take on them one by one. And the reason that all of them will be discussed in this session is that we would like all of you to open up with any questions that you might have, and with any reservation that you might have, or with anything which is bothering your mind, but maybe you think that this is something very, or we can regard to be a taboo question or a question that people don't generally discuss. But you see, the purpose here is to not to convince people of a particular point of view, But to start this culture of discussion and debate on these sensitive issues, you might not be convinced with the answer, but that doesn't matter. I mean, it's the least thing that should bother you. The thing that is, I would say, the objective of these sessions is to tickle you, if I may use this term, tickle your mind, tickle your brain, and come out of any shyness that you might feel. I'd refer you to our mothers, of course, the wives of the Prophet, who are the mothers of the faithful. They would ask all sorts of questions from the Prophet, and not only his wives, but all sorts of people would come to him, men and women, and they would be not shy to ask any question. And this is how the knowledge of the Prophet was actually handed down. So remember that the key to knowledge is not to abstain from any question that comes to your mind, however silly you might think it may be. Because what happens is that generally questions which are thought to be silly, they actually open new doors towards new frontiers and new aspects of knowledge. So today we're going to discuss three topics. One of them is educating children about sexuality and how to come about with this all-important area of human life. The second thing that we were going to discuss relates to Aisha, who was the youngest wife of the Prophet, and because it is believed that she was 6 or 7 years old at the time of her marriage, because of a narrative which is found in Sahih of Imam Bukhari. So that is another question that comes to our mind, that was she a child bride, or someone of this age would be someone this would be very odd that the Prophet marrying someone who was fit to be her daughter, actually, if the age is correct. And finally, we'll also discuss the testimony of women, which is generally thought to be half. And this testimony, as you can see, is something which has come up in a lot of discussion and debate, and especially in amongst legal minds. This is thought that women cannot testify as far as hudud punishments are concerned. Hudud punishments actually refer to punishments which are meted out or administered in cases of Islamic punishments of certain crimes. So their testimony is not admissible at all. However, it is only admissible in certain exceptions. So these are the three topics that we will try to cover today. And as I said, the purpose is once again to thrash out what the current understanding about these topics is, and to revisit them and discuss some of the alternatives that have been offered in this regard. So let's start off with the first topic, which is regarding sex and sexuality. And this all-important topic is something, of course, that has to be thrashed out and has to be discussed in all the aspects that would relate to our own human life. And I'm going to discuss those major parts, but if I leave out some of them, maybe, then you can always have questions and ask or discuss them right after I finish this short session. So the first thing that we need to realize is that as far as sex and sexuality are concerned, sex is a very natural urge which is found in every human being. It's our instinct. Just as we have the instincts of food and drink, the instinct of sex is something which arises mostly at puberty. Contrary to the first two urges, like drinking and eating, which is something which are found or appear in a human as soon as he or she is born, comes into this world. So eating and drinking is something which is instinctive. But the instinct of sex and sexuality, or the sexual urge, it doesn't appear immediately. It appears after a period of time, and that is mostly at puberty. And it is this age which is generally called as adolescence. So we experience this natural urge in ourselves of satisfying our sexual urge. And the Quran tells us that this is one area in which all of us would be tested the most. And because of the fact that the nature of this sexual urge is that it is really, it takes the better of us. It is extremely, it is something which we need to exercise a lot of control and a lot of discipline if we have to come to grips with it. So therefore, the alternatives or things which set it into control are also need to be equally potent. So to start off, we need to understand that when this urge appears in our cells, and boys and girls, when they go through this period, they must not in any way feel guilty that it is something that they should be ashamed of. This is a very natural thing, and in fact, it is something which ensures the continuity of human race in this world. So this is something not to be ashamed of. It's not a negative urge in any way. It's a very positive urge. It has its own benefits. It's just a question of rightly or wrongly using it. So, in order to understand and in order to have a life in which this sexual urge, if we start giving ourselves to it or following ourselves towards it, we'll find that there is no end to it. So, before I actually talk about how we can manage our sexual urge or how we can satisfy our sexual urge or what are the areas and what are the options which the Quran and Hadith give us vis-a-vis this all-important area, I need to explain a little more regarding the background of the life of a believer, the background of the life of a young boy or a girl as he or she grows up, and the way he or she needs to be groomed. So you see, the first thing that parents should instill in such grown-up children or who have entered adolescence, and remember, if you're not parents, that doesn't matter because inshallah, one day you're going to be parents. So this advice is something which relates to each one of us. So the first thing that we need to inculcate in our children is that God-centered approach, that deep God connection that each of us need to have. You see, all of us are born in a way that we feel that we have been created. We have this natural urge to attach ourselves to someone who has created us. Because when we find ourselves in this world, we find that there are so many things which someone has created outside in our world and inside as well, which is looking after us. Our human body, the sun, the moon, the stars, the parents, the environment that we live in, we all find that they are caring for us. So there is someone outside us, someone within us that we can experience who is looking after us, who is someone that we need to connect because it is he towards whom we need to turn to. It is he towards whom we have a natural urge. He is someone who is looking after us without even asking for that help. So the first thing that all of us naturally experience is that God connection. All that our parents need to do in this first phase of life, which I call adolescence, even a little before that, is to enhance that feeling, is to stimulate that feeling and make people realize that our basic obligation when we live in this world is to realize that we have a creator above us. He is someone who is watching over us. He is someone who has given us the conscience that all of us have. So the first court of justice is the conscience that we have. So making children sensitive towards our conscience and telling them that they have to follow their conscience come what may is of primary importance. If your conscience tells us to do something, then you have to follow that. So the first thing, as I said, would be that strong God connection that gives us this feeling that someone is looking after us and we are going to be held accountable one day before God in a way that our own conscience tells us. So the second important thing at a very early stage, which parents or our future parents need to do, remember I'm discussing sex and sexuality, but as I said, this is how we need to build up and understand that topic because it stems from a certain lifestyle. It stems from a certain angle that all of us need to adopt in our lives, in which the urge, which is so dominant, which is so provocative, which is so overwhelming, it needs to be checked and used in a positive way. So this is a background check that we all need to go through. So I was talking about the strong God connection. The second important thing is that each one of us must be told as we grow up that we have to set ourselves a positive aim in life. All of us must have an objective in life. We just cannot live without an objective. We just cannot live in this world without thinking that we have to do something. We have to contribute to this world in some way or the other. Because if we don't do this, we will be swayed by our emotions. So to keep ourselves disciplined, to keep ourselves in check, and also to contribute positively through the power of creativity all of us have been blessed with in one form or the other, we need to find our own inner talent to start with. Because the Almighty has blessed each of us with some talent or the other. We possess some ability, some aptitude. that we need to discover, and then set or use that ability or that talent to set ourselves a target in life. This is precisely what Socrates had in mind when he said, "Know thyself." The famous maxim, "Know thyself," means that you need to understand who you are from inside. And when you start to understand whether you're an artist or a writer or a historian or a mathematician or a computer wizard or whatever, so that is where you are able to set yourself and make yourself in the groove. And your own hobbies are a very good example to let you know what kind of a person you are, what aptitudes you have, and how you can turn your passion into your own profession. So the best thing would be that your passion becomes your profession. But if it does not, you still should have some target in life, some aim in life, which is in line with that aptitude. So this is the second thing. Remember, we were discussing sex and sexuality. Remember, we are discussing how parents should go about training their children and setting themselves towards this and trying to come to grips with this bigger challenge. So we've talked about God connection. We've talked about how each one of us must have an aim in life, because all these things, what they do is they balance our attitude, they discipline our attitude, and strong urges which tend to topple these, our own personality, they are kept in check if we have that balance in life. The third important thing in this regard is that all of us have been told by the Quran that as we enter into adult age, as we become, we enter into adolescence, we need to keep our eyes in check. You see, staring at the opposite gender and lustfully staring at the opposite gender is something which the Quran tells us that we must avoid, because this is what will create impurity in our hearts. This is what will create imbalances in our own lives, and we will be prone to a lot of things that God wants us to shield from, to get us protected from, to be secured from. So the third important thing that we need to understand, and as parents teach our younger generation, is the importance of controlling our eyes and setting them and giving them that objective that if you have to stare at the opposite gender, it should be the stare of a brother towards his sister, the stare of a brother towards his daughter, the stare of a brother or a son towards his mother. So just as we look upon the opposite gender, especially these close relations, it should be very similar how we should view other people of this gender or other relations of this gender, because this is what keeps us pure. This is what keeps us more motivated and committed to the fact that we have an objective in life. We have God with us, with whom we have to connect. And of course, that sexual urge which is building up in us is something, again, that has to be kept in check by guarding our gaze, by not letting that gaze take undue liberty. So this is the third thing that we need to understand. So the fourth and important thing here in this regard is that because at the appearance of adolescence, we have that strong urge to connect with the opposite gender and make friends with them. So you see, what we need to understand here again is that making friends with the opposite gender, if it is for an objective, for example, for your studies, for an assignment, for some other commitment that has a meaningful expression, it is fine. But it is discouraged if you have that connection with the opposite gender for the sake of having it, for the sake of friendship, in which, of course, we tend to lose our composure, and there's always a chance that friendship, when it develops with the opposite gender, because of the fact it has immense attraction, it will continue. So you see, the most important thing, which I tried to explain otherwise as well, is the family unit. And that family unit is something which can be severely compromised if extramarital relations develop. And these actually start off before even marriage takes place. So when you have friendships with the opposite gender, those friendships, and when I talk of friendships, of course, I refer to those frank friendships, those candid relations which people have with the opposite gender. They're likely to continue even after marriage, and really, really dent the institution of marriage, which of course is something which God never likes, because on the stability of the institution of the family is built the stability of the whole society. So these are some of the four things that we need to understand. And there's one more thing that I would like to discuss here again, And the fourth thing in this regard is what I would call as the way that we dress up. So, as you can see, that our own dress is something that has to be in a way that decency always prevails in our dress. We need to dress up in a way that we do not show the physical shape of the body. It should be loosely dressed. It should not be a way. It should not be. We should not wear a dress in which we are able to, or which in which our body is exposed to the opposite gender. Because again, this is not something which is very commensurate with the notion of purity. So it's not that it's going to. The purpose is to stop other people from gazing at you. The Quran, entirely contrary to the general belief, tells us that if you wear a proper dress, then it is something which is more closer to piety and purity of the heart. Salikum azka lakum are the Quranic words. So if these 5 general guidelines are adhered to one by one, just to let you go through them in a sequence, you'll find that there is this general education regarding sexuality in which we are able to come to a certain balanced personality who is not swayed by extreme emotions. And one of these extreme emotions, of course, is the sexual urge. So as I said, having a strong God connection, having an aim in life, and when I talk about strong God connection, remember the fact that we have to follow the voice of our conscience. We have to think that one day we are going to be held answerable before God. And the second, as I said, is to have an objective in life. Thirdly, we need to guard our gaze from taking undue liberty. And of course, the fourth one is that we should try and not meet the opposite gender in seclusion, especially for purposes which are other than any meaningful and any other meaningful need. And finally, our own dresses and the way that we dress ourselves should be within the limits of decency. And of course, decency is something that all of us know. And of course, the concept of decency can vary from society to society as well. So this is how we should have a general background towards the approach or towards how we could tell ourselves or educate ourselves and educate the future generation regarding the sexual urge. So with this background, I would now come to discuss or like to discuss some specific things which relate to sexual urge or to sex. So one of them is homosexuality, the other one is oral sex, third is anal sex, and the fourth is masturbation. All these 4 are important questions. They have specific connotations, as you all know. And of course, they are questions that we need to have answer to, especially what religion tells us, and especially in this regard, that what sexuality at times may mean to all of us. So the first thing that I'd like to discuss here is the issue of homosexuality. Of course, this is again something that we need to be aware of and discuss openly amongst ourselves, with our children, and of course, with all those people who think that this is something which is sexual orientation. This is a form of sexual orientation that all of us need to be aware of. You see, for this, we need to go back in history and go back and see the scheme of God. The scheme of God on which He has created mankind is that the union of a man and a woman produces the family through which this world is to prosper, and the child which, as a result, is produced from a family is someone who needs the care of the father and the care of the mother at the same time. There are some things which the father provides, and there are other things which the mother provides. So when the Almighty created this world, He did not create 2 Adams, He did not create 2 Eves. So He created 1 Adam and 1 Eve, which tell us that the scheme of the Almighty has to be fulfilled in a way in which 1 man and 1 woman come together to form a family. And therefore, it is this relationship which is what is held holy and sacred in the Quran and in the previous scriptures as well. So therefore, any relationship which is otherwise, which is homosexual, maybe it's between 2 men and men or between women and women, this is something which is discouraged and looked down upon in religion, because this is something which is totally against the conception of the family. So because of the fact that the institution of the family is something which religion tries to inculcate in us, and it tells us that as far as union between 2 people is concerned, coming together in a family, it has to be between a man and a woman. and therefore, and any other union, it does not permit. And for this reason, it tells us that this has to be discouraged. Now, there are people who ask that is there a punishment for homosexuality, or is this punishable by any any sort of prescribed punishment? Then the answer is no. The Quran tells us that this, of course, is a deviation. It is a deviant sexual behavior, and it was a behavior for which a certain nation, the Prophet Lot's nation, was punished as well, but not merely for this behavior, but because they denied a prophet of God, along with this proclivity on which the prophet of God had warned them. So this is something. The punishment which was meted out to them was not the punishment of merely indulging in homosexuality. It was basically a punishment which was given to them because they had denied a prophet of God, and the prophet had actually warned them that this relationship is not something which is at all suggested by the Almighty. So today, if people have this deviant behavior in any way, they have a different behavior or different sexual proclivity, what we can understand from the Quran and what we can learn from the Quran and a lot of other things which supplement it is that we should deal it in a way in which counseling or coaching or discussion or educating people about sexuality is concerned. And people maybe should be told that this is a deviant behavior. If they have this urge, then they need to be rehabilitated in a way. And if this is a very pronounced, and again, it is something that needs to be tackled with, but it cannot be regarded as a normal behavior. It cannot be regarded as something which Islam permits in any way, and not only Islam, but all divine religions. But because today we are living in a world where perversion is the name of the game, there are a lot of perversions, there are a lot of variations. We have necrophiles, we have pedophiles, we have so many types of philes that all sorts of these deviations are occurring. But as I said, as far as the Quran is concerned and Islam is concerned, it strictly says that only relations which come, or sexual relations which come into being between a man and a woman, and that too in the form of a formal marriage contract, is something which is allowed. All other relations, it does not condone them in any way. Now, as far as the sexual activity itself is concerned, because people who get married, or even before they get married, they need to be given this instruction and guidance that what about the various forms of sexual activity or sexual postures, if I may use this word, are allowed. So you see, verse 222 of Surah Baqarah, which is the second surah of the Quran, it gives a comprehensive answer to this question. And the verse actually relates to the periods or the menstrual cycle of women. And it tells us that having sexual intercourse, or husbands having sexual intercourse during the menstrual cycle, is something that it should not. This is prohibited as far as sexual intercourse is concerned. Obviously, other forms of sexual interaction, they are allowed, but intercourse during the menstrual cycle is not allowed. So this is what this discussion is going on in this surah, when the Quran talks about menstruation and sexual relations during menstruation. And right after that, it says, فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْنَ فَأْتُوهُنَّ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ. Just a very small portion which actually answers this question regarding oral sex and anal sex in a very definitive way. It says that once women have cleansed themselves and they are no longer in their menstrual cycles and they have bathed and become pure, then their husbands are told that فَأْتُوهُنَّ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ. Then they should approach their wives in the way they have been told in their instincts, and which is, of course, from the frontal side of the vaginal intercourse. So this is a very explicit instruction of the Quran, as I understand it. And as a result, anal intercourse or oral intercourse or oral sex or anal sex, they stand prohibited, or they stand to be proscribed. The Quran tells us that the only form of sexual relations with your wife is concerned is through the proper way, and that is the vaginal intercourse that is actually ingrained in human nature. Now, the last thing which I would like to cover here before you can ask questions, because I've been I've covered most of the topics, but my objective here is to raise some of the important issues with their background, and then if you have questions, we can go on with that. And that final issue is the issue of masturbation. Now, as far as masturbation is concerned, this is something which has been, again, a subject of a lot of debate and discussion, and the general view regarding masturbation is that it is prohibited. Well, according to my understanding and understanding from the teachers from whom I have learned religion, there is no such prohibition anywhere found in the Quran or any authentic hadith which tells us that masturbation is prohibited. There is no such thing. There is not a single verse in the Quran which in any way prohibits masturbation. There is not a single authentic narrative of the Prophet which prohibits it. Masturbation is something which, I mean, is left to a person's discretion. Of course, medical advice should be sought. I mean, this is something which, like other things, I mean, other excesses that one can indulge into can lead to some other situations. But religiously, there is not a single Quranic verse or a single hadith which stops it or which prohibits it. There is a certain verse in the Quran which is generally thought that it prohibits masturbation, and that is a certain verse which tells us that that believers, they are ones who only interact for their sexual activity with their wives, and the way it has been, I mean, set out in Surah Ma'arij and Surah Mu'minun, it seems as if it is limiting our sexual activity to women, of course, who are our wives. Now, here again, what needs to be understood is the words which are actually used there is illa ala azwajihim aw ma malakat aymanuhum. So, which means that the sexual activity which husbands should be with their wives or with their slave ladies. Now, the issue of slave ladies is something which we're going to discuss, inshallah, in the next sessions, and we'll come up. I mean, we'll see how what exactly is the meaning regarding sexual relations with slave women. But for the moment, let's concentrate on this word vis-a-vis the word illa ala azwajihim. So on the basis of this word, it is thought that sexual relations can only be established with the wife. Now, if you analyze this verse and you analyze the context as well as the way the words have been constructed, what it says is that if you have to have a sexual relation with a person, with someone outside yourself, someone besides yourself, then it has to be your wife, no one else. It does not in any way prohibit masturbation, or it does not say that sexual activity has to be confined to women. What it says is, or to wives, that whenever you have to have a sexual activity or a sexual relationship with a human being, then it has to be your wife. So you see, this condition of human being is something which is found there in this verse, and this verse in no way prohibits masturbation in any way. So similarly, there is a narrative which is generally invoked regarding masturbation, and that is nakihul yadi malun, which means the person who releases his energy or self-pleases himself is someone who is cursed. This narrative is absolutely a weak narrative. It is an unfounded narrative, and it has no basis at all. So these are the two sources that are generally invoked in favor of masturbation. Now, one thing, of course, is we need to understand is that I mean, all sexual activities at times they are either ingrained, they arise from that natural urge, or they are externally induced. For example, if a person starts viewing pornography or things like that, and then he releases that urge through masturbation. So when I say that masturbation is prohibited, of course, I would not, I mean, it doesn't mean that all things which precede masturbation or whose consequence that masturbation is, they're also allowed. So, for example, pornography or things which are of similar nature, that should not be considered to be understood as they are something which are allowed if masturbation stands allowed. No, they are, of course, proscribed, because earlier on, as I said, the Quran tells us that we have to guard our gaze. We must not let our gaze take undue liberty. So if that is the case, that you're not going to, look at the other opposite genders' physical attributes, even when he or she is wearing clothes, you can easily see that viewing someone without clothes or naked or in the nude is totally prohibited. So that has already been taken care of. So just to sum up this whole discussion, I've just said that as far as sexuality is concerned, we need to approach this whole subject with a certain background. And that background is essential because the nature of the sexual urge is that it actually overpowers us, it overwhelms us, it sways us. So unless we have a particular balance in life, we will not be able to control it. And for that balance, one thing is to have a strong God connection. Another thing is to have an aim in life. Still another thing is to have a person, to be a person who's conscientious, is to be a person who who has a particular objective in life, and then he or she has a dress that is always covering the body in a way that it doesn't at all show one's physical shape. And finally, if we have to befriend the opposite gender, it has to be for a purpose. So this is how the general background towards sexuality has to be, because these are the things that are going to keep it in check. And as I said, it is not a condemnable urge at all. It is something which actually is a guarantee for the continuity of this human race, and it has pleasure as well, and the Almighty actually wants us to enjoy that pleasure. But the fact is that it has to be between the husband and wife. So with this background, I discussed some of the issues relating to specific sexual orientation, and one of them was homosexuality, which I said is clearly something which the Quran does not at all condone. Similarly, oral and anal sex are something which the Quran stops us from. And so, except for oral sex and anal sex and sexual intercourse during the menstrual cycle, all other forms of sexual closeness or proximity, I would say, have not been prescribed by the Quran, have not been prohibited by the Quran in any way. And finally, the issue of masturbation, which has been grossly miscommunicated. I can, out of my own personal understanding, let you know that this is something which was never prohibited. In fact, we have the statements of the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, which have been mentioned in certain sources, which say that this is a water which a person has, and if he releases that water or she releases that water, it is his or her own choice. Statements to this effect. So this is something which was openly, discussed, and people knew that there's nothing wrong with it, except if you follow it up, or it is followed by certain other proscribed activities, like which I just pointed out, like viewing pornography or something very similar. Of course, that is something which is not allowed. But if you have a naturally induced urge of releasing yourself or of sexually satisfying yourself in any way, that has not been prohibited at all. So with these words, I end my first session here, and for any question that you may have, please go ahead.
So for anyone who wishes to ask a question, I'll ask you to raise your hand, and we'll ask you in sequence to pose your question with time allotted. Also, because this is a youth session, we are prioritizing questions for those of you who are under 30. And if any time remains, then we'll also allow elders to pose their question. So for the first question, I have Mariam Azmi, please.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. I had a couple of questions in the chat that I'm going to read out. So the first question asks, what should a bisexual Muslim do regarding their sexuality, especially if they fall in love with the same gender?
Well, I think this is something that they have to control themselves in a way that maybe they can seek medical help or counseling, because this is like having a deviant behavior or behavior in which, this is not a normal thing. So just as people are born with certain abnormalities, it should be taken as a trial and test from God, and medical advice and counseling should be sought.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, for someone who knows that watching porn is wrong, but they aren't able to control themselves not watching porn while they masturbate, will Allah be displeased if they continue to do so?
Well, surely He would be displeased, because this is something that He has prescribed, and He says that you have to guard your gaze, you have to leave these things and concentrate on your own inner purity. You see, we need to understand that religion stresses that we have to be pure from inside, and anything which tarnishes the image of our soul has to be forsaken, because this sexual activity, the way we do it in this form, is something which tarnishes our image. It makes us addictive towards certain things. It destroys, in the ultimate long run, the institution of the family, or it is potentially destructible for that. You see, what needs to be understood is that all things which are potentially destructible for the institution of family have been proscribed, because for the institution of the family to flourish and to grow, God wants the emotions and the and the urges of husband and wife specifically reserved for one another. When you watch porn, or when you have extramarital relations, all those things, what they do is, because they have a tremendous attraction in them, they keep you involved in themselves. And when you get married, or if you do this during your marriage, what happens is that your relationship with your spouse is severely hampered, it severely suffers, and you start looking outside. You start satisfying your own self, and instead of satisfying that sexual urge between the husband and wife, what happens is that this thing starts to go on separately and individually, and that marriage bond is weakened. So you see, all these instructions, if just one thing is understood, I get an answer to those questions, and that is the importance of the institution of the family. That is something which the Almighty wants to safeguard at all cost. So, like guarding our gaze, or like wearing a decent dress, all these things have been specifically stopped because they can lead towards fornication or adultery, which is something which is the ultimate thing that destroys the institution of the family. So all those things that can make a person, lose his way from his spouse, is something that have to be abstained from. So, I mean, if you look at the larger picture, and if you view why the Almighty wants us to abstain in this regard, and what are the options that we have if we are not married, then of course we have that inspiration and motivation to work in the right direction.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question in the chat asks, do you need to perform ghusl after masturbation?
Yes, we need to.
Thank you. That was it.
Rohan, you have the next question. If you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask that, okay, we are not allowed to look at the private parts of other human beings, but but there is no prohibition about using sex dolls. And obviously, when you use something like that, you look at it. So that leads me to thinking whether watching animated porn is allowed or not, because they are not the depiction of a real human being. They are just, made up drawings or animations. So it's just like looking at a sex doll, you look at an animated person, animated porn. So tell me about that, please.
Again, you see, this is something that you have to decide from your own conscience, and see how it can make you an addict or a person who falls for something. You see, the basic objective is that something which becomes addictive, something which draws your attention so much towards it that you indulge into it into an extreme sense, and ultimately it distracts you from your own spouse. And if you're not married, then there are chances that even after you get married, you'll be indulging at the same thing. So if the nature of that attraction is such that it has potentially the strength or the power or the potency or the intensity that it can draw you away from your own relationships with your spouse, then it should be abstained from. So I think the decision in this case has to be made by the person themselves. You see, the thing is that purity is something which can be always our target. And one thing that I'd like to mention here, and in that, of course, that's the principal thing, and that is that, you see, if we have a target in life, if we have an aim in life, and if we are people who have every person has some form of creativity in himself or herself. So what God wants us to do more is to use our creativity, to use our creative power, to contribute to the society, to be individuals who are inclined towards things in which other people can benefit from, in which you can use your own talents. So you see, what happens is that all those other things are taken care of and they are being given sufficient time. Then such proclivities, as you've just mentioned, they do take place. I mean, it's difficult to avoid them at a certain age, but they are kept in check. So I would suggest that although the question that I've just answered is related, or it hinges on the fact that it's your own conscience which is the best judge, but I'll add to that, and that is that if you have made your life in a way, if you've set up your life in a way that you have a goal in life, you use your creativity, you have other urges which are stronger than the sexual urge. I mean, to put it another way, to check your sexual urge, the best thing is to have something equally more powerful and potent in parallel, which you fall for. And one of the things that I have found to be much more powerful than the sexual urge, or at least equal to it, is the power of creativity, is the power to contribute. is the power to do something in which you bring something into being. It satisfies you, it involves you, it makes you center, or it focuses you towards a certain thing. So if you're able to check that, you'll find that a lot of things which are now being created to enhance your sexual urge, or to enhance your, I would say, to enhance your appetite towards sex, they will automatically remain in check.
But the issue is that sometimes a person's conscience doesn't work right. I mean, for example, my conscience always told me that masturbation is not right, but there's no prohibition about it. So I don't know how to use conscience as a guide.
Okay. So you see, you cannot use masturbation from your conscience, because there are things in which religion speaks. I mean, wherever God or the Prophet has spoken, they are the things in which you already have to have proper knowledge. You should not decide masturbation, the allowance of it, or the prohibition of it on the basis of your conscience, because this is something which has to be told on the basis of scriptures, or God is going to tell us. When I talk about conscience, it is in matters in which you have a basic guideline, and then you need to see whether you're following that guideline or not. The basic guideline is that you should not fall for activities that involve you so much that they take away that urge to remain committed to your spouse. That is the principle. So if the principle is there, then there are so many things which are now being invented today, and they'll be invented tomorrow as well, for sexual pleasure. So you have to decide, keeping in view that principle, whether we should go for these things or not. So this is how I use the conscience.
Right. So as long as I keep a check on myself that I don't get addicted to animated porn, and my relationship with my spouse is not affected, you say that it's okay, right?
Or another thing is that at times, you see, what happens is that instead of experimenting, you know that this is something that can always lead you towards excesses. So, I mean, there's one way to learn from experiment, do it your own self, and there's another way in which you can have an idea that, of course, this is something which is going to lead me to that. So both these ways can be adopted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Riaz, can you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Assalamu alaikum, Dr.
Wa alaikum assalam.
If I understand, I think you told that homosexuality was not punished, but the punishment was due to denying of the prophethood.
Correct.
Yeah, but the question is, I mean, when the prophet also told them at the same time that the homosexuality is not allowed.
Right.
So I think it leads us to believe that the punishment was the part of, I mean, the homosexuality was the part of the punishment. I mean, we cannot deny it, then separate it from that.
Actually, if you read those Quranic verses in which the Prophet Lot has been mentioned, and other verses in which other nations have been mentioned who had a specific evil in them. For example, the nation of the Prophet Shuaib, they indulged in wrong, I mean, they would not weigh and measure properly. They had this proclivity towards deceiving people. So this was an added trait, negative trait which they had, on which the Prophet of God warned them. And the Prophet of God, whenever they are sent towards people, the people are in some form of deviation or the other. It could be sexual deviation, it could be economic deviation. So what happens is that they tell them that this is not the right way. And at the same time, they tell them that I am a prophet of God, I've been sent by God, and you have to obey me. So primarily it is the punishment which have been mentioned in the Quran, which relate to their destruction, which means that those nations were destroyed when they did not listen to the Prophet. You will find, when you go to those appropriate verses, that everywhere that punishment was because of denying the Prophet. Now, the denial itself, of course, is something in which there was this thing in which the Prophet stopped them from certain malpractices. So what I'm trying to, the point that I'm trying to make here is that people who derive capital punishment for homosexuality from the accounts of Prophet Lot, that is something which has no basis. Because the capital punishment of the people who were executed or they were punished by an earthquake, as was the case in the Prophet Lot, that was a divine punishment. And that punishment actually was from God for denying his prophet. So this is how I understand it. It doesn't mean that people who indulge in homosexuality have to be executed in any way, because the Prophet Lot's followers or who did not follow him, they were executed by God. So this is where, I mean, you wrongly make an analogy.
But at the same time, I mean, we cannot say that the homosexuality is allowed in our religion, I mean, right?
Of course, that I've already said. It is not allowed. What I'm saying is that its punishment has not been prescribed. What I was just referring to the fact is that it is absolutely prohibited. But is there a prescribed punishment for homosexuals? I was just negating that.
Okay. So before the next question, there were a couple of questions in the chat. I'll ask those, and then I'll indicate to the next person who's in the queue. So one question, Dr. Shehzad, was with regards to child abuse and how to talk to children regarding child abuse, and if there's any resources. Another question.
So let's take them one by one. If you allow me, I can just answer the first one. You see, the thing that you need to make your child aware of, I mean, as he or she is growing up, is that if anyone starts touching his or her private parts, which of course can be indicated by the parent, and the fact that there is some advances which are made, you can always tell your children, you can always tell them that when these specifics arise, then she or he must come to the parent and tell them. So that is the first area. I mean, there's one thing in which a child is unfortunately picked up and subjected to abuse. That's something, of course, at times that we can do nothing of. But there's another thing in which these advances are first made, and people try to make friends with such children, and then they try to, induce them into these activities. So young children need to be told that whenever someone touches or indicates a certain thing regarding the certain part that they have, their sexual organs, then they have to immediately report this to their teacher or their parent, because this is what is going to check their the whole malpractice at the very start. And as they go along, of course, what happens, the ultimate, I would say, thing in this regard, which goes unchecked, is incest. So I know a lot of young girls who are subjected to sexual activity or intercourse by their fathers, and in a very young age. And of course, this is something, this is the ultimate thing in which, where could they go? Because it was the parent to which they had to come and report this thing. And the parent himself was involved in this. So I have seen cases in which young girls would go to their mothers and tell them that what the father has been doing. And the mother would either try to hush up and say that just be quiet, or she would not believe the child. And so in this case, the extreme would often result, and a lot of problems would be complicated. But as I said, this is a very extreme case. So, but lesser than that, I would say that we have to train the children to tell them that whenever there is a certain thing that we can always point out, then he or she needs to come to the parent immediately and tell them who the person is and what exactly he or she was doing.
Okay, I am JG, and I think that will have to be the last question for this session until we're done with all questions, and then if we have time, we'll come back to other questions, please.
Okay. Walaikum assalam.
Doctor, my question is regarding takabbur or arrogance, and by takabbur, I'm saying social, not the social takabbur, but the internal takabbur a person does, and naturally a person does. For example, the modern.
Can I interfere here, because we're taking questions regarding the topic that I've just discussed. For general questions, I would request you to please wait for the end of the session. So
all right.
This is just for the
All right. Thank you.
Okay, now comes our second topic of today, and which is the issue of Aisha radiallahu anha being the child bride of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you would be remembering that when there was this famous cartoon controversy in Denmark many years ago, and subsequently we have so many other instances of these cartoons being published, and the subsequent reaction that all of us know took place in Norway, in Belgium, and some of the other countries of the world. So one of the cartoons that were made and which produced a lot of anger from the Muslim was that, even it shudders, I shudder even to quote it, but just for the sake of for the sake of letting you know that how important it is to deal with this subject, and that is that the Prophet was, Nauzubillah, called a pedophile because of the fact that he had married Aisha radiallahu anha when she was just 6 or 7 years old, it is said, and the marriage was consummated when she was 9 years old. This is a narrative from Bukhari. Now, as far as Bukhari is concerned, I think most of you would know that it's something which most Muslim scholars would they regard in utter veneration. So they say that this is a book which has been compiled by Imam Bukhari. Of course, he was a very celebrated muhaddis, which means a hadith scholar, and it is the general belief is that whatever he has written in his Al-Jami' Sahih, which is his book Sahih Bukhari, cannot be questioned because it has been put through a lot of historical criticism, and anything which is against the Quran or established history has not been jotted down there by Imam Bukhari. So because of the fact that this narrative has come into or has found its way into the Sahih of Imam Bukhari, the belief by every Muslim, I would say very few exceptions, when I talk about Muslim scholars, is that she was a child bride, and she was a child bride as people think, and she was married to the Prophet, and she was married to the Prophet right after his first wife Khadija radiallahu anha had passed away in Mecca. Although we know that Sauda radiallahu anha and Aisha radiallahu anha, they were almost they came to the Prophet's house at the same time, but the general consensus here is that when Aisha radiallahu anha went to the Prophet's house, she was 9 years old. The nikah took place, or it was the actual marriage ceremony, which is the marriage contract, took place when she was 6 or 7 years old. And as I said, because of the fact that this is mentioned in the Sahih of Imam Bukhari, this is what people think. Now, the question here is that what exactly is the truth regarding regarding this whole matter? Now, I'd like to present before you an alternative picture. And this picture has been presented by a few scholars of the subcontinent, and they have re-researched into the age of Aisha radiallahu anha from other sources, from other historical books, early Muslim history, which tell us and give us information regarding her life and the time when she got married, and of course the difference between that marriage and when she actually came to the Prophet's house, because we know that the nikah took place a couple of years before she actually joined the Prophet. She was with her parents, and it was only 2 or 3 years after the nikah that she came to the Prophet's house. So just bear with me, and I'll just show you a small calculation which has been made by a lot of scholars of the subcontinent, and they have shown how erroneous it is to believe that she was 6 years or 9 years old when she got married to the Prophet. Okay, so just see the small calculation in front of you, which has been now displayed. Okay, these are the 5 things that or these 5 bullet points that you can just see. I'm going to explain each one of them, and you can calculate the age of Aisha radiallahu anha immediately as a result of these historical facts. Now, what has been presented here, it has been taken from the historical source books of Muslims from early Muslim history. The first thing that you need to know is Asma, who is Aisha's wife. She was 10 years older to her. So all Muslim sources mention that Asma bint Abi Bakr was the elder sister of Aisha bint Abi Bakr, and the difference between their age was 10 years. Okay, the first point. The second point is that Asma died in 73 Hijrah, which means 73 years after migration took place, when she was 100 years old. Yes, this is something which is specially recorded, because there are tracts in Muslim history in which people who have lived close to 100 years or who have very long ages, they have been specially recorded among the Mu'ammareen, which is a special category of people who had long life, who had a long span of life. So Aisha radiallahu anha, the first thing that you know her, that she was 10 years younger to her elder sister Asma. The second thing that we know is that Asma died at the age of 100 years in 73 Hijrah, which means when migration or 73 years had passed the migration of the Prophet. Migration, of course, means his migration from Mecca to Medina. Okay, if she was 100 years old in 73 Hijrah, then very simple mathematics tells us that at the time of migration, her age would be, yes, 100 minus 27, minus 73, which is 27. I mean, 100 minus 73 would be her age, which is the 0 point on migration. So remember, 27 was Asma's age when the phenomena of migration or the historical incident of migration took place. The first thing that we just noted down was that Aisha anha was 10 years younger to Asma. So if Asma was 27 at the time of migration, what would be Aisha's age? She is 10 years younger. Obviously, she would be 17. So Asma was 27, Aisha was 17 at the time of migration. Now, all historical sources tell us that that Aisha anha was married. The nikah took place in Mecca when the migration had not yet taken place, and the departure of Aisha actually took place in Medina, and 2 years or 3 years after the Prophet had come into Medina. So, if this is the case, then it is a simple mathematics will tell us that if Aisha was 17 at the time of migration, or the nikah took place somewhere around that age, and when the Prophet came to Medina, 3 years or 2.5 years after he came into Medina, it is reported that she came to the Prophet's house. She actually formally came to the Prophet's house for the consummation of marriage. That would mean that if she was 17 in the Meccan period, just before migration, so therefore when that migration took place and the marriage was consummated, that was another 2.5 years or 3 years, she would be a girl of 19.5 or 20 years. So this is what the calculation tells us, and therefore if you look at those alternative sources, you'll find that as far as history is concerned, it has reportedly told us that as far as her marriage is concerned, she was certainly not a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old. She was a mature woman, and of course she was someone who, with her own consent, she was asked her consent from her father Abu Bakr, and she gave her consent. It was not that the father himself had married her off, as is generally considered, because a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old cannot give her consent. So she gave her consent, and she was ultimately married to the Prophet. And as I said, that simple calculation, if I can just go through it with you once again so that it becomes even more clear. Remember, Asma is Aisha's sister. She's 10 years older. Okay? Asma died in 73 Hijrah at the age of 100. Right? Therefore, Asma would be 27 at the time of migration. And Aisha automatically would be 17 because she was 10 years younger. And Aisha had her nikah in Mecca just before migration. And Aisha came to the Prophet's house 2 years, some say 2 and some say 2.5 or 3 years, whatever. So if 17 is added to 2 or 2.5 or 3, we have a minimum of age of 19, and above that would be 19.5 or 20 years. So in other words, this calculation tells us that, alternative sources tell us that this is absolutely incorrect, that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had married a child, as is generally understood or generally considered. He had married an adult. She was a mature lady, and out of her own consent that she had entered the house of the Prophet, and she looked after the children, of course, and these children were young, and the Prophet and Prophet's first wife Khadija radhiyallahu anha had left those children after she had passed away. So therefore there's absolutely no question of the fact that the Prophet had married her at such a young age. And another thing that you need to understand is that at times what happens is when ages are mentioned in the Arabic language, the units and the tens, they are mentioned separately. For example, 17, when I would say I would say 10 and 7. At times what happens is the way these numerals are written in Arabic, like for example Saba Ashara, which means 17, is not one word. So I would pronounce it as 10 and 7. When I say 18, I would not say 18 in Arabic, I would say 10 and 8, which makes 18. So there is always that probability that when her age was being mentioned as 7 or 9. It does seem that the numeral was half. I mean, it could have been the fact that the narrators actually left out that numeral in which just one part remained, for example 7 or 9, and the 10 part which said Saba Ashara or Isna Ashara or Tis'a Ashara, which would mean 19 or 17. So one part of that numeral somehow could have been dropped. This again is an assumption which has been made by certain scholars. It's not just a wild guess, but it's a probability, because Imam Bukhari, of course, is someone who would not have mentioned this. But what happened is that it might have been the case that later manuscripts of Bukhari might have, this could have happened with the numerals, as is the case with, because things were being jotted down by hand. There was no typing machines, or there was nothing, which could be composed. And also at times things were published or written in a way that they would not be rechecked. So there's always the possibility that in Bukhari, the actual words were 17, 10 and 7. But the 10 part somehow was dropped when the scribe was actually writing down, and the 7 part just remained. This is just a conjecture which has been made by scholars, because again, it is difficult to believe that Imam Bukhari would have miscalculated the age of Aisha radiallahu anha. But anyway, if he did, we do find from alternative sources that this is certainly not the case. And Aisha radiallahu anha, she was a mature lady when she married Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is what I have understood from other historical sources. And if you have any questions, please go ahead.
Okay, and I'll ask that the questions be related to the topic of the age of Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha, or child marriage. Amina, please go ahead. Okay, we'll see if we can come around to you later. Hasib?
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My question is, so I understand that you share that Aisha radiallahu anha, whose sister was 10 years older than her, but how can we be confident that that piece of historical information is more accurate than the piece of information that she was 6 or 7 years old?
Because it's more closer to common sense. I mean, why would the Prophet marry a child who is 6 years old or 7 years old, and his own children were of the same age? Obviously, you see, one of the reasons that you marry is to have a companion. He had just lost his wife, who was older to him, and he had children who needed to be taken care of. So, I mean, it beats common sense that why would he bring home another child with whom he cannot have any companionship? What exactly was the purpose of marrying her when he couldn't have had any companionship with him? He couldn't have intimate relations with that young girl. So what exactly would he do? I mean, what exactly would he would have in mind if this was the case? And if we have an alternative historical source which is more closer to common sense, which is more closer to human practice, why shouldn't we believe it more? And also at the same time, we do know that narratives in Imam Bukhari's Al-Jami' al-Sahih, there are many narratives which have been misreported at times. They have been criticized by many authorities, and because of the fact that he was a human being, he could have faltered. So why shouldn't we do something which is more improbable? Why shouldn't we reject that instead of accepting something which is improbable?
Okay, that makes sense. If I can just follow up really quickly with a short question. The other thing that I've heard people say sometimes is that in that society, it was not it was a somewhat common practice for older men to marry younger girls. So I know how you said that it's closer to common sense that he would marry someone that's older that he can have companionship with. But as per his times, could someone make an argument that this was actually something that was normal? And how today people are repulsed by this idea, but not so much back then. So maybe someone could argue that it's actually, as per the common sense of people at that time, it's not totally like something strange.
So you see, in those times, the practice was there that you would marry young, even very young children, like the age of 6 or 7 or 9. But then again, typically people would be having other wives, from whom they would be receiving companionship. and all the benefits which marriage affords. Here is a case in which the Prophet doesn't have any other wife. He brings home a child, and he already has about 6 children to be looked after. He adds another one to that list, and he has no one to turn to, and he has his own responsibility as a prophet of God, which means that he is very, very engaged in those activities. So you see, it again belies the human practice in common sense, that yes, it was a practice at that time, but then it was a practice in the presence of other wives, because you were drawing benefits from other wives. But in this case, what exactly would the prophet be benefiting from, or why there has to be some logical explanation, because the prophet wouldn't do something out of his own fancy or without any logical outcome of a certain act. So either he was maybe trying to be a patron, which we know that he was not. Was Aisha someone who needed a patron? No, because he already had Abu Bakr as his father, who was well looked after. She was not an orphan. So you see, there could have been some other reasons besides this, but then there are no other reasons that we can find. She was not someone who was forsaken in the society. She was not someone who needed to be looked after, because that would be the only other logical explanation why the Prophet added one more child to his own list of children.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, Dr. Shehzad, one question in the chat is if you can provide a source for the age of Hazrat Asma.
Right.
If you know that handily, that'd be fine. Otherwise, we can share in the WhatsApp.
So this is a book called Tahqiq Umar Aisha. It's a book in Urdu, and it is by Hakim Niaz. You can, if you type it in Google, I did so some time ago. You'll find a free PDF of that book available, and you can just download it. It's called Tahqiq Umar Aisha by Hakim Niaz Ahmed.
Okay.
And there's another book as well that might be worthwhile, and a very similar book of a similar name by Habibur Rahman Kandilwi. So Habibur Rahman Kandilwi is another scholar of the subcontinent who passed away a couple of decades ago. So he has something similar. So you just write their names and a possible title of the book, and it'll come along.
Asir, please.
Sir, one question, actually two questions. Sir, first one is with regard to the age of Hazrat Aisha or Raziyallahu anha. Sir, won't it be better if we, I've gone through these sources that the two books that you've mentioned. So, but won't it be better if we discuss what the Quranic, injunction is with regard to the age of getting children married? Does Quran in any way, in any surah, I'm particularly mentioning Surah Nisa, refer to give an idea as to what should be the age of children? Because the Holy Prophet, obviously, if those verses are already mentioned, wouldn't do something which will be against the dictates of the Quran. So that's my first question. If you could answer that, then I'll ask the second.
So you see, there is no explicit indication in any surah of the Quran regarding the age. All that we know is that it has to be from the consent of the husband and wife, and that is something, or the wife, or the boy and the girl, which is mentioned outside the Quran as a sunnah, which means that nikah, or the word marriage, is a contract between two people who, out of their own will, not from the will of their parents or some other coercion, they decide to come together. So this is established Abrahamic practice. Nikah is something which in itself means with the consent of the two, they enter into a marriage bond. As far as the Quran is concerned, in Surah Nisa, it just talks about certain issues which had arisen in those times. For example, of the battle of Uhud and Badr, a lot of Muslims had been martyred, and it was encouraged that people marry more than one wife for various reasons. So if this is a situation that has arisen, then why not people come forward and marry these the mothers of these orphans, so that they could take care of these orphans. So that is a particular situation that had arisen, and then there are some other directives as well. But the Quran doesn't need to mention the age, because you see, this is something which has already been there before even the revelation of the Quran as an Abrahamic practice, because nikah itself is a sunnah, and as I said, it means coming together of a boy and a girl out of their own consent for this marriage bond.
Sir, when it says mutual consent of the boy and the girl, doesn't that in any way refer to the obviously for consent you require intellectual maturity? So doesn't that implicitly state that both the girl and the boy have to be mature?
Of course, that doesn't mean that is an implicit thing that consent can only be given when they are in a position to show their consent. Below age people or immature people, they cannot give their consent. But you see, that is what that there's a general statement of the Sunnah. What we are trying to do here is that we are further analyzing the fact that because of the fact that Imam Bukhari's historical source has given us a very alternative picture. So there are various ways of countering that picture. One of them is this way that you just dismiss it by telling us or saying that, well, underage marriage is not allowed because we would not have the consent. So that could be one way. But you see, when you dismiss something or when you refute something, at times you do it from various angles. So this is another angle from which this refutation has taken place.
Sir, one thing more, sir. You said the Prophet, the purpose of marriage is companionship. So the counter argument to that, to your argument by the scholars given, is that this marriage was ordained by Allah Himself. So in fact, they also cite the hadith where Jibreel alayhi salam comes to the Holy Prophet and shows him the picture of Hazrat Aisha, which is in one of the Jami al-Sahih. It shows him the picture that this is the woman that you're going to get married to. So since this was already ordained by Allah, so there is there's no question of companionship here. The Prophet had to do.
Can you send me that narrative?
Sir,
okay.
Yes.
Please do.
Sir,
as far as I'm concerned, there is no such authentic narrative which tells us so.
Right. All right. Sir, my second question was regarding this. I think I forgot. Sir, in Surah Nisa itself, doesn't it talk about the orphans, to test the orphans until they reach a certain age and then give them the property? Isn't that talking about referring to a certain age when that is to be transferred to the orphans? So doesn't that also give us an idea?
No, that is something else. You see, that is that as guardians of the orphans, which says that you should not, when you're guardians of the orphan, that's a general instruction. It doesn't necessarily concern itself when it comes into play as a result of marriage. It just tells us that if you are guardians of their orphans, of certain orphans, then you should not use their wealth, in a way, in haste, so that you can use it, and when they are mature, you have nothing to return to them. So that is more of a general instruction, whether you marry their mothers or not. It is regardless of the fact that if you are made guardians of these orphans, you should guard their wealth. And if you have to use certain wealth so that you have to maintain yourself and them, then it should be exactly in the proportion that it is needed. So that is more of a general instruction.
Right. And sir, lastly, sir, I was listening to one of these scholars. He said that the problem with which most of the Muslims have is that they have a problem with Hazrat Aisha being, below the required age, but they don't have any problem when Hazrat Ismail alayhi salam between 6 to 9 years was getting slaughtered by his own father. So how do you counter that argument?
Well, will the time come? We'll discuss that as well. The Prophet Abraham never slaughtered or was never asked to slaughter his 14-year-old son. By the way, we know he was around 13 or 14 years old from the Bible and from the Quran, indications of the Quran. He was not 6 or 7 years old. And of course, even that is not sufficient excuse, I would say, or a pretext. But as I said, the Almighty never asked him to slaughter his son. All he asked him was to dedicate his son to the cause of the house of God, and that he was shown this in the form of a dream, and dreams need to be interpreted. And this interpretation, as can be seen from all biblical scriptures, that when you see someone being sacrificed in your dream, the purpose is to dedicate that individual for the cause of God, for the house of God in that particular case. So that is why in that particular case, the Almighty said, "Qad saddaqta ru'ya," and Abraham, you actually made your dream come true. This was not required. All that I needed was you to make this commitment that you will dedicate your son Ishmael for the house of God, which you have just built, or which is going to build. So you see, these are counter arguments which people make without understanding that those other arguments that they are making, they don't mean what they what is generally understood.
No, sir, the argument was that how Prophet Abraham understood the Roya. Not what Allah will, but...
I think, Asir Saab, I think we have lots of questions. So I think we'll have to limit this discussion at this point, but you can bring this up in our WhatsApp chat.
Okay. And Sean, I would suggest that we don't discuss the third topic because that's slightly lengthy, and we are already, have a lot of questions, and we had questions from the first session as well regarding sex and sexuality. So whatever time we have, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, I think let's focus on the questions that relate to this discussion, to the first one, and to any general question that people might have. I'll take up the third topic inshallah in the next session.
Okay, if that's your preference, that would be great. So one question we had in the chat by Amina, who had mic issues, basically, she was saying Dr. Naik and maybe some other people have mentioned that Hazrat Aisha had passed the age of puberty, and if that's the case, then what's the issue with accepting that narration?
How did they know that she had passed the age of puberty? Did someone tell them? At the age of 6 or at the age of 9 that she had passed the age of puberty, what information did they have that she had passed? What is the source of this information?
Okay, and Abdul Wadud, if you can go ahead.
Okay. Assalamualaikum, Dr. Shehzad Saleem. My question is regarding when you stated that it's logical that she marries, that the Prophet marries a woman that can take of her children, that relies on the assumption that Muhammad was indeed a prophet of God. But the people that posted pictures of the Prophet in compromising photos, they do not necessarily believe that his marriages need to have a purpose. How would you refute them with some authentic hadith or some other source that indeed his purpose of marrying was to take care of his children? I would appreciate if you could put light in that matter. Thank you.
So if you're talking about the fact that people that we need to discuss here are the ones who do not even believe that Muhammad was a prophet. So if that is the question, then I would not discuss his marriage because this is something which would come later on. I would first try to discuss that yes, he was a prophet, or try to debate or discuss or prove to them that he, like other prophets of God, he was a prophet of God. So once his credibility as a prophet of God is established, after that, of course, I'll try to explain the reason of this marriage. So you see, it depends who your audience is. If people are there who don't even believe that Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was a prophet of God, so there's no use arguing with them or discussing with them things which come later once the prophet has been commissioned, so to speak. So I think the logical way would be to first discuss or try to convince them. And if they're not convinced that he's a prophet of God, then there's no need to go further in this debate because we've tried our best to communicate, and that's how we should be. First, starting off with a discussion which is more primary. And if that discussion leads us to the next one, of course, then that can take place. And if that discussion isn't conclusive, then nothing can be done, I suppose.
Okay, Malik Faisal Aslam.
Yeah, I have received few questions in chat box. One is that Quran is also allowing to marry prepubescent girls in Surah Al-Laq verse 4. So how would you say about that?
So that is another misconceived notion. The Quran does not allow. It says, "Wallahi Aisna min al-mahid in irtabtum." Within the verse, which is verse 4 or 5 of Surah Al-Laq, it says that girls who have reached puberty and still have not menstruated, in spite of the fact that they have reached puberty, then their iddat is such and such. So it is not referring to young girls or girls which are underage. So that's an erroneous translation because the word used in that verse is lam yahidn, which means they have not yet menstruated in spite of reaching their menstrual age. It doesn't mean who have not menstruated because they are young. So the word lam in Arabic, if it is given due consideration, the translation would be that girls who have reached that age in which girls generally menstruate, in which they have that period, and still because of some medical condition they have not menstruated, for them the waiting period or the iddat is 3 months.
Yeah, another question. Fauzia is requesting for any specific advice on first cousin marriages and any effects.
Well, you see, I think that as far as first cousin marriages are concerned, if they are causing harm, as is the case generally in many societies, for example, the children they are born handicapped or deformed, if a prohibition is imposed by the government on such marriages, it seems in line because in order to stop children from coming into existence, which are a burden to their parents and which, of course, cannot be any contributing individuals to society and cause grief also. So if to limit that, the government imposes a law that cousin marriages are prohibited, I think it is just fine. It's just okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But it could be that in certain other areas in which cousin marriages, they are not producing these harms and these ills, although it's hard to foresee that, because in most cases it does, because it's a medical thing that when you start marrying in the same strain in the third or the fourth generation, or even much before that, these cousin marriages, they result in a lot of deformities in the child who is born. So it is better that they are limited through law, and that is the only way. Other than that, if there is no law, then all that you can do is exercise your own prudence, exercise your own intellect and wisdom to abstain as far as you can. Many times you just cannot, because it's not always that cousin marriages produce bad results. I mean, at times it's just fine as well. So when it's left to your own choice, you have to exercise your own prudence. But whenever a country sees or a government sees that something is going wrong in this regard, it can always, as is the case in the US, in many other countries that are, not all the states of the US. I know there are some states which still allow cousin marriages, but it's perfectly okay if a government legislates in this regard and prohibits cousin marriages.
Okay, Rohan, you can go ahead.
Right. So I had this question that it is narrated that Hazrat Aisha said, "I used to play with dolls in the presence of the Prophet, and my girlfriends also used to play with me. When Allah's Messenger used to enter my dwelling place, they used to hide themselves, but the Prophet would call them to join and play with me." And in brackets, it is written that the playing with dolls and similar images is forbidden, but it was allowed for Aisha at that time, as she was a little girl, not yet reached the age of puberty. The reference for this is Sahih al-Bukhari 6130, and in book references, book 78, Hadith 157. So this kind of confused me. Can you please elaborate on it?
Well, this narrative is against established practice and common sense. I mean, it cannot be accepted in any way. And on its face value, it tells us that she was a, toddler who was playing with her dolls when the Prophet came, when she came to the Prophet's house. We know from other historical sources that this is not correct. So when historical sources other than this tell us that this is improbable and not correct, we will not regard this narrative to be an authentic report or an authentic narration of the actual incident or the actual history that it portrays.
All right, thank you.
Okay, IMJG, please.
Dr. Am I allowed to ask a general question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, doctor. So my question was regarding takabbur and of the modern day atheists and their arrogance. Like how do you destroy it? How do you destroy takabbur? Like there are two types of takabbur. One is the social takabbur, which is like you don't talk to people properly, you don't show humility in your words and everything. But I'm talking about the takabbur that you do from within towards God, right? Like how do you destroy that?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to understand is that why should we be after destroying takabbur of other people who have taken upon themselves to be
like generally, doctor, like even if we sometimes get it, right? Like if we get that takabbur sometimes within me because of low iman or something of that sort.
No, okay, that's another thing. You see, when you have that takabbur or you have that feeling of arrogance in yourself, or you think that you need to correct your own feeling, then of course that's another thing. I was just talking about going after other people's takabbur. I think, as you said, rightly said, that it's first of all we should check our own selves, because this is a tendency that all of us may have because of various reasons. Well, the first thing that can check our takabbur is that we should have a very fair idea of the faults and the shortcomings that we have. The biggest thing that cuts ourselves into size, that makes us realize that we are human beings who are not perfect, and we just cannot think of ourselves to be superior, is to look at the follies that we have, look at the shortcomings that we have, look at the things, we do a threadbare analysis of the mistakes we commit every day. Because you see, takabbur, or being think ourselves to be big or elderly or superior, can only be correct or true for people who actually have those traits. But what about the fact that we have several other traits which tell us that we are ordinary human beings? Our own skill set is something which does not boast of very many qualities. So the first thing is a realization of the fact that our own follies, our own mistakes should cut to size our own stature in our own eyes. The second thing is that, of course, you can see people around us who have this tendency of being mutakabbir, or they are arrogant and they are haughty. And you have live examples of so many people who had this, and the fate that they met. I mean, you can have those common examples which might be there in the society, even in our own families, in which people boasted and posed themselves, and ultimately they had a very, very sad ending. And you can see people at the top of history, or in their own eras. They were people like Hitler. You can imagine the amount of arrogance that he had, or Mussolini, or people who thought themselves to be superior, and the fate that they ultimately met, and how hated they became in the annals of human history. And the third thing that also checks this tendency is to feel pride of the skill set that you actually have. If you feel proud of the fact that I have certain abilities that I can work upon and that I can enhance, so that actually I can make a difference in the society that I'm living in, that makes you more realistic, more conversant, more down to earth, because now you're now acknowledging the fact that you have a certain skill set that can really be amazing as far as your own contribution to the society is concerned. You need not pose or need not make yourself appear to be greater in the eyes of other people, because you have certain things in which you can actually be the same. Instead of posing, you are actually a person who can make a difference. So I would say a three-pronged approach could help us check our arrogance. And one more thing that we need to understand here is that what exactly is arrogance? And the Prophet, in one of his narratives, one of his very beautiful narratives, has actually described this when someone asked him what takabbur is, because it is said that one of the Sahaba had started to wear new clothes, and he came to himself to the Prophet and said, well, I'm wearing new clothes and it makes me feel good, and is this takabbur? And the Prophet said, this is not takabbur. Allahu Jameel wa yuhibbul Jamal. God is beautiful and He likes beautiful things. If you dress up beautifully, if you wear something beautiful, that does not constitute takabbur. And then he said what takabbur is. He said, Batul haq wa ghamtun nas. To deny the truth and to regard people to be inferior. This is what takabbur is. So denying the truth is again something which is takabbur. And regarding people to be inferior to yourselves, that is takabbur. So I think this is something which makes us understand.
Can everyone mute themselves, please?
I didn't hear the last one, Doctor. I'm very sorry.
So I said that did you hear the hadith that I just narrated?
Yeah. No. Yeah. I heard the hadith, but you said something in the last. I couldn't hear that one.
Well, just an explanation of the hadith, and I said that takabbur has to be understood in its context. It is something in which you deny the truth and regard other people to be inferior to yourselves.
Mm-hmm. All right. Then, Doctor, how do you differentiate between self-respect? Like some people, like takabbur and self-respect. How do you create how do you divide it? Like, how do you create a line between those two?
Again, you see, self-respect is something in which you are not demeaning yourself. You're not doing something by demeaning yourself, by groveling, or by expressing yourself below your own level of integrity. And you can always know that when you ask this question to your own self, that whether you're doing something out of takabbur or it's that you're just trying to maintain your integrity. At times there is a very fine line, understood, but again that fine line has to be judged by our own self, because at times what happens is that you are trying to save your integrity and you're indulging in a form of takabbur. So it has to be that you are there are areas in which you're just trying to maintain your self-respect. You are just trying to show to the other person that he or she is not acknowledging you in the right frame. And for this reason, if you're not compromising on certain practices, it's because of this reason. Otherwise, you would have gladly done so. It is only because the other person takes it to be a form of weakness, or he or she considers it to be something which is against the norms, that you're not doing this. So again, I understand where you're coming from. There is a fine line, but again, it has to be a question that you need to ask your own self, whether that self integrity is being challenged, or whether you are actually posing yourself in a certain way that would be demeaning for others.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you very much.
Mariam, did you want to go ahead, please?
Sure, I can. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions, and then there are a bunch others.
Okay.
So the first of all, like two of the participants were saying that how is masturbation halal if it might become addictive and people might not find the need to get married or take responsibility, and one might not need a spouse anymore because they're pleasuring themselves through masturbation, and so their spouse is going to suffer. So how is this allowed? Isn't it against Islamic spirit?
Well, in the strict sense of the word, if you are depriving your spouse of this, then of course it is something that must not be indulged. But what about the fact that, for example, if spouses are living far off from one another, at times they are not able to fulfill one another's sexual urge. They're living in different cities. At times you meet your spouse in a very limited period of time, and then there are issues which so many people tell us that the spouses being ready to have sexual interaction with each other at the same time. Many a time it happens that one of the spouses feels a strong urge and the other spouse is not ready for that. So you see, there are a number of situations in which that practice can be used to your own advantage. So it is basically your own prudence and your own wisdom when you start to misuse that practice or wrongly use it or become too addictive to it that causes those problems. So my take here when I was discussing masturbation was that, is there anything in the Sharia which stops it? So what I'm saying is there's nothing in the Sharia which stops it, but at the same time, your own common sense, your own practice, a lot of other things, they should make you realize that at times it is something which you can do it, and there are other times in which you should control it. So as far as doing it and feeling guilty about it is concerned, that was what I was trying to do away, that there are so many people, almost every person who indulges in it, and then at times because of religious background or I would say misinformation, thinks that, he feels guilty and very guilty about it. So this is the guilt aspect should be done away with. And other than that, we have to be careful in our own lives. It's just like, for example, smoking is something which is injurious to health. Now, if you overindulge into it, or you start doing it in a way that damages your health, there's a case for it. And if you're able to control it to a certain extent, if it's possible, then there is again a case for it. So you see, things which can go right or wrong naturally, and they have not been covered by the Sharia as prohibited, they are left to our own discretion. And at the same time, they leave a lot of avenue open for us to make this option at times, to use this option at times, in which we need to have a proper satisfaction of our sexual urge, but the spouse is not available.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, is it okay to keep watching animated porn if the person, one, does not get addicted and their spouse isn't affected?
I think I just answered this question earlier on. We had a discussion on this in the first part.
The participant wanted a bit more clarification about what she meant by experimenting and if it's okay to do so.
As I said, again, this is something, if you think that it does not affect the purity of your inner self, you see, these are all things that need to be gauged in a certain way. Our basic objective is to remain as pure as possible. Whenever we see something, if that sight is something which is I mean, there are certain explicit things when you view real-time things, like for example, pornography in its actual real image is like replicating real life. But as far as animation is concerned, it could tone down that actual image, and it could enhance it, because it would depend from person to person. So instead of answering in detail, in a particular format or a particular application, I would rather answer in principle and let the person decide. And if it is something which is bringing you close to that same addiction, or it has the same effect as you would view pornography in so to speak in real time, then it should be avoided. And if you think that it is something which is much of a less impact on you, and it is also not drawing you away or not making you addictive, then you can make the choice. So it's all in all a choice that you have to make, and you should have the principle before you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saleem. And the final question was, is it okay to use sex toys to masturbate or with your spouse?
Again, I would say the answer here is something that the person himself or herself should decide. But for all practical purposes, if you're doing it for yourself or with your spouse, I don't see any problem with it personally.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saleem.
Okay, Hasib.
Yeah, sorry, is it okay if I ask a general question not related to the topic?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so the thing is that I live in Canada, and obviously all the food here is not halal, so you have to be a little bit cautious. And until recently, there were a few key points that I kept in mind, like, you know, avoiding gelatin and haram meat, pork, whatever. But recently I came across a couple of sites that were showing different ingredients found in packages that could be haram. And now it just seems like every other ingredient in any product, like even something simple like cookies, could possibly be haram. So I'm kind of in a difficult situation where I can't, like, it's even to the point of micro ingredients like vitamin D3 or, you know, whatever. So I feel guilty every time I eat something, but at the same time, like, every product has something that could be questionable. So I'm unclear on how far I need to go in ensuring something is halal, and does haram apply to these micro ingredients as well? You know, not just the whole product in itself. Yeah.
So you see, I think a very good case in point is to understand gelatin. If you understand how we deal with this issue, you can extend it and extrapolate it by analogy to other products as well. What happens is that gelatin or things which are, of this sort, of this composition, when they are when they form, they find themselves being introduced into a food ingredient, they change their chemical composition because they no longer remain in their original form or the way they had been originally. So in most cases, these ingredients, when they are used in processed food or in other types of food, they always change their original chemical composition, which transforms them from maybe something which could have been prohibited. For example, gelatin is taken from the stomach, or it's an enzyme, as you would know. If it's taken from the fat of a prohibited animal, then again, as the case in point is that if gelatin is taken from the fat of a swine or a pig, you can clearly see that even if it is taken, because of the fact that this chemical composition ultimately changes, so therefore gelatin taken from even such prohibited animals is fine, because it is no longer the gelatin that it originally was. It has now completely undergone and transformed, and it has become a new substance. So if you need to understand anything, you can by analogy see whatever the products they are written in those on those pins or whatever you have in front of them. You can see that whatever they write, they are the ultimate finished form of that product, and that finished form of the product has drastically undergone a change of chemical composition.
Okay, I see. So am I required to contact the companies and 100% confirm that there's been chemical change? Because
you don't need to. You don't need to. You see, do you need, except where you find, you might have a question. Otherwise, in cases where these products are written the way they are written, they are ample proof of the fact that they have undergone a change. It is only where you have a doubt that you need to maybe confirm.
Okay. And in cases of doubt, would it be better to just refrain from eating?
Well, in cases of doubt, it would be better to refrain it, unless if you can have it reconfirmed.
Okay, Malik, Faisal.
Thank you. We still have some time, and I received a couple of questions, Dr. Shehzad. The first the first question is by not Hasib, I think by Najam, about Surah Baqarah's verse Fatu harasakum anna shi'tum. And this question normally is asked with reference to the anal orientation of sex.
You see, you have to understand the Quran from all the verses. You cannot just pick up one verse, which means that you can come to your wife from anywhere that you would like to. This verse occurs in context with the other verses, which tell us that there are certain other ways in which you should not come to her. So whenever something is stated generally, and that exception is stated before the whole directive, then you have to view the directive in its totality. So when it is said that you should not come to your wives from the anal side or from the mouth, and other than that, fatu harsakum anna shi'tum. If these things are taken care of, and if you don't come to your wife when she is passing through a period, if you don't come to the wife through the anal side, and if you don't indulge in oral sex, then it says fatu harsakum anna shi'tum. You can come to your wife in any other manner that you would like to. Just pick up the Quran and just see how these verses are related to each other, because they occur right after the other one.
Thank you. Next question is by Hamad, that if masturbation is halal, so why is they affecting our body and mind?
Again, you see, this is when Islam prohibits something because of its moral sin or moral harm. It doesn't mean if it is not prohibiting something that thing can be injurious to health. For example, smoking is something which Islam doesn't even speak about, but of course it could be injurious to your health. So other things need to be evaluated on the basis of medicine or medical science or other forms of science. If masturbation is something which is harmful or injurious, if medical science tells us, then we should pay heed to it. What I was trying to say is that it is something which is not morally wrong. The prohibitions of the Quran and Islam, they relate to moral right and wrong. So it is not morally wrong to indulge in this. If there is a medical issue, if there is an issue with your health, because Islam does not deal, with these issues, it leaves these issues to be dealt with our own common sense and practice and the experts. So the experts tell us something about masturbation which limits it or which makes it something which people should abstain from, then that advice has to come from them.
Okay, lastly, I am combining Fauzia's two questions. Any resources for parents to learn about child abuse and how to talk to children and when about abuse?
Well, I have written a small book on this subject. It's called Modern Challenges to Parenting. I think it's available at most of the outlets of Al Mawrid, and it has been written specially keeping in mind the fact that a lot of things which have today arisen amongst the younger lot, and our parents are not very well conversant how to deal with these changes and these advances, if you may call them. So that is a small effort that I have tried to make that might be of benefit. And other than that, there are a huge amount of resources, but I cannot recommend them personally, because there is a lot of zaif narratives, zaif ahadith, which are invoked in such tracts, especially sex education of children, which I made it a point to discuss today. Other than that, there are a number of good books related to child psychology, child parenting and the like, and of course you can look them up on the internet, because our import here is to deal with the religious side. The intent here is to deal with the religious side of parenting as well as the social one. So this is how I would deal with it.
Okay, Mariam, I think you have another one.
Yes, a couple more actually. So the first question asks, if Islam propagates haya, so how can we be allowed to observe obscene scenes, whether animated or imagining them, without, isn't that morally wrong?
You see, again, this is something, if you're imagining something of a situation in which is unreal, uh, again, you see, there are various, I would say, sections and that need to be dissected or need to be gone into in more detail. If it is not someone who is a I mean, someone in real life that you know, or a certain person who exists, and someone who is in your imagination, or just a figment of your imagination, and you're just using it for your own pleasure, I don't find anything offensive about it or anything which, I mean, wrong about it. But this is how I feel. Other people can feel differently. I mean, haya is something which always relates to particular individuals. Your own haya means that people who you know, or people who don't know, but they exist in this world, and you can relate to them in some form or the other because they're real life people. Your haya actually primarily relates to them. And anything which is less than that, the haya factor decreases proportionately towards those things. For some people, it could be absolutely curtains, and for other people, it could be something very subtle. So I think, again, it's a question of your choice.
So you would say that this applies to animated scenes as well?
You see, I cannot answer this. I mean, my own, unless I see them. But what I can advise is here is what the advice that I can give is in principle, that all these things which make you, I mean, which have that ability of taking you away from your spouse, which cause that contamination in your eye, and which have potentially the ingredients which real life pornography has. The closer it is to it, the more you can give a direct answer. Otherwise, I think it's again something that you have to answer, keeping in view the principle that I've just alluded to.
So when the participants are talking about animated pornography, it's very close to real life, and it's extremely explicit, and that's what they mean.
Well, if an animated pornography is very close to real life, then it has to be avoided. So that is why I said that unless I can see and give you an opinion, which I would rather abstain from, I think the principle is the real thing. The principle is, if anything is classified within pornography, whether it's animated or whether it's real, then that should be abstained from.
Okay, and then the next question asks, you often talk about inner purity. Can you please elaborate what you mean by that?
Well, inner purity means that you are a person who is devoted to the Almighty. You are a person who has that ability to, in your own knowledge and in your own deeds, in which the directives of God, in which the relationship with God and your relationship with the hereafter is always your first priority. So it is something in which your deeds and practices, your knowledge and your ideology, they stick towards a certain God-centric approach, and that gives you that purity in which you are able to concentrate and direct your attention towards things which are holier, things which are purer, things which are God-centered.
Okay, Muhammad Yasin Khan.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Dr. Shehzad, I want to ask why sexual relationship during menstrual cycle is prohibited. Is there any medical reason or some other reason?
The Quran tells us it's an impurity. It says, "Yas'alunaka 'anil mahid, qul huwa azan fa'tazilun nisa fil mahid," which means that it's a form of impurity, and that is why it tells us that anything which is impure and which is of the nature of contamination, that it should be avoided. So it's an explicit instruction from the Quran.
So how can we make them other? How can we explain that it is impure? In which logical sense?
I mean, you just because the Quran tells us that it's just impurity, that the blood that comes out at this time has an element of impurity. It is not pure. I think it's just the verdict of the Quran which tells us the nature of this impurity. So I think that should suffice. You don't need to use logic for that. It's like telling us that when you are excreting something, for example, when you are urinating or you are defecating, the things that they come out, they are impure. I mean, your urine is something which is impure. The feces that come out of you are impure. So in a similar way, this is an impurity which the Quran tells us that the blood that comes out at this time is impure, and therefore at this time you have to abstain from any sexual relation with your wife.
Okay. But as far as unbeliever is concerned, when this matter comes with them, so how can we make them? We can give them any logical answer, because they say anything on the ground of medical science.
You see, for a non-believer, I think this is not the right approach or the right way to tell them, because for them, the first thing would be to make them conversant with who God is, or maybe what the Quran is, or what Wahi is, what revelation is. All these things, I mean, they can be made to they can be made to understand these things once they believe one of the basics, and that is what the Quran is, who God is, why does God want us to be pure, what exactly is purity for God. For example, in God, even purity of beliefs is something which, when it says that innamal mushrikuna najis, which means that the beliefs of these idolaters is impure. You cannot make this understand to other people that why is it that polytheism or shirk is impure. So you see, there are certain definitions of impurity and purity when you come to religion, and that can only be explained once you start accepting what religion is, and once you start accepting these things. So I think it's better to ignore these discussions with them, because unless the basics are resolved first, you just cannot have a discussion on this topic, because this can only be resolved once, as I said, the first steps they are taken care of.
Okay, I think it looks like we've run out of time in terms of questions, and I think we'll just give the last few minutes for Dr. Shehzad to summarize anything that he would like to leave us as parting words.
Right. So, as I said, this was a sensitive topic, and I tried my best to come to grips with it. But the bottom line is that the sexual urge is something which has a very important effect in our lives. It grips us like no other thing, and therefore, in order to keep it in check, we have to have a general balance in life, a God-centered life, a life with a mission, a life with some creative ability that we need to exercise, so that our whole approach towards life is something in which we have some other centers, some other pushes and pulls as well. And if that happens, then keeping our sexual urge in check and not letting it go out of control is a thing that can be contemplated. And the other thing that we talked about, of course, was the age of Aisha at the time of marriage. And I think that the alternative view in this regard is much stronger and more closer to common sense and to the dictates of the Quran as well, which of course mean that consent is something which always is there between the boy and girl, or the man and the woman who marry. And underage children are not afforded with this choice. And not to speak of the fact that even in Surah Talaq, which is generally invoked, verse number 4, regarding the fact that you can marry underage children or underage girls, that particular verse has also been, unfortunately, not been properly understood. It doesn't refer to underage girls. It refers to girls who have reached their age of adolescence. They are fully matured, but because of a medical condition, they have yet to menstruate. So, as I said, it's not at all essential to agree with what I have said. I have just tried to open up a discussion, so to speak, with you to think a lot about issues that have been presented before you, and to find answers and to tickle you, so to speak, so that you are once again in a mode to find out what the truth is. Just, suggest to yourself that we are people who are seekers of the truth. We would like to find out what the truth is, and it's basically the process that is very important before God. Whether we reach the truth or not, we can never know. But if we are trying to reach the truth, if this is something that we have set out for, this is what God wants. So this is what I would like all of us to do, that start searching for the truth. It doesn't matter if you don't agree with anyone, but it does matter if you stop searching for the truth. So thank you very much. Inshallah, we'll be there with some of the remaining topics next week, inshallah. So it is Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shehzad, and thank you, everyone.